Today we're revisiting Steven Universe comics with the Boom comics numbers 5 and 6. The first two-parter in this little series. And I gotta say, even though it meant a little bit more work for me, that being reading another short comic, so not a ton, right? I was really excited to see this was a two-parter, because I figured, hey, we're finally getting into some of the meat and potatoes of this thing. And I was right. The main issue with this one is that the meat and potatoes of this one are a little spoiled, i.e. the continuity of this one with the show itself is the worst that these comics have ever been. Which means that, technically speaking, based on the same rules set forth by the crew that made these comics technically canon, since these contradict the show, they're not canon anymore. Probably. Like, there's the framing device of this one, the fact that there's no library in town because the monster destroyed it, and nobody's built a new one yet. And so Steven and Connie try to raise some money to do that with a garage sale, pulling a bunch of stuff out of Greg's storage unit to sell. Not everything, but a bunch of stuff. So that doesn't blatantly contradict the fact that they don't clear out his storage unit until later in the series. But obviously the thing with the library is untrue, because there is a library in town. Steven had never been there, despite the fact that he states outright that he was there with the gems to fight the monster. And also it had remained there undisturbed long enough for them to find an old journal there. So clearly the framing device itself is not canon. But if you strip that away and say, hey, the kids are just trying to do a garage sale for whatever, like we've already seen in a previous issue of this same comic series, that they do want to raise money just to have extra money. So do that again. Headcanon that they're just raising money for themselves. Right? Like, literally the only thing that the library contributes, other than that framing device, is the fact that it relates back to the fact that the gem monster in this one is a book, and libraries have books. A detail that doesn't have to be there for this story to work, it just makes the different elements feel a little more cohesive with each other. That said, I think it actually works better, though, if they're not putting together a garage sale to raise money for a library if they're planning to sell books at it. Because wouldn't you want to keep the books for the library then? So, I don't know. Do with that what you will. That is a major issue, and there's another one later also. And it's the one that I'm having trouble rationalizing away. But we'll get to that in a second. The specific story of this one is that they have everything laid out in the beach house, getting it ready to label for sale. And Pearl comes in while Steven and Connie are out doing other stuff and sees it all and is trying to organize it, but doesn't have time because of an upcoming gem mission, so she just shoves everything into her pocket dimension. But because that includes the aforementioned gem creature, a book with a gemstone on the cover that Steven really should have realized was a gem, come on, man, that he apparently got from Connie? Like, I don't know if the implication is supposed to be that Connie found it in Greg's storage unit while they were going through the storage unit and read a bunch of it but then gave it up, as she states in dialogue here, or if it's a book that she had previous to this that she just brought to the sale to try to sell it. I wish that had been more clear, but Connie's already had a little bit of experience with this book. She never finished reading it, which is important because in the end Steven defeats it by finishing reading it. Apparently that's what this book creature wanted, was for someone to finish reading the story in its pages. Which is a little weird, but corrupted gems are supposed to be damaged, so it does make sense that their motivations would be irrational sometimes, just like all the various corrupted gems that want to eat stuff, despite the fact that gems have no biological need to do that. But anyway, now that it, along with all this other stuff, is in Pearl's pocket dimension, it's in there active, screwing stuff up, which is messing with her programming and making her actually physically sick. And this is where that other continuity inconsistency comes in. Steven and Garnet actually physically go inside Pearl's gemstone, into her pocket dimension, to find this creature. And what makes it so hard to explain this one away is that they specifically go to the same place that Steven was sent to when he went inside Pearl's gem for the first time much later in the show. That being where she files away items that she's stored there. And there's no head Pearl. There's no, like, iPhone-esque slidey interface where she calls everything up. There's just a bunch of wooden doors. that have different collections of stuff behind them. And I just don't see Pearl as the kind of person who would completely change their filing system in just a couple of years, right? Maybe over a very long period of time, but not in just a couple of years. Remember, gems are long-lived and slow to change. So you combine that inconsistency with the fact that Steven clearly hadn't been inside Pearl's gem prior to, what was that, Single Pale Rose, I think. And this one, it's hard to justify with the rest of the series, which is such a shame because these are actually really solid. All the interactions between Steven and Connie in part 1, and then all of the action inside the gem in part 2, and part 2 basically just being a long action sequence, all have a lot of good stuff in them. Steven and Connie feel very much like the Steven and Connie of the show, which is always a treat because I do like seeing these characters interact with each other. And the fact that the story wasn't so compressed as it's been in past issues of this comic meant that the action sequence actually got a chance to breathe. And I still don't think this is any award-winning action or anything. It's more on par with the kind of thing I might write. But at least there's clear flow to it. There's a clear beginning, middle, and end, and even obvious tactics that make sense, including Steven actually using his powers to help, which was fantastic. I always liked seeing Steven and Garnet fight together, and while I do feel like this could have been realized better, this whole sequence could have been realized better, it was still realized well. And the idea of interspersing that with Pearl randomly sneezing up garage sale junk from her gemstone was pretty funny. It was a lot of fun. Reading this one was a lot of fun, and not for any subtext that I had to read into it or anything like some of these past ones have been. I could see this becoming an episode of the show and being a really solid one. Again, aside from the continuity inconsistencies. And I even like how frustrated Pearl seemed with the gem book once they get it back outside of her gem, how quickly she bubbles it and how insistent she is that they never unbubble it, because it did really inconvenience her. Not only did it make her sick, but it messed up her stuff. That was very in character for her. So there is a lot to like here. It's just that those aforementioned continuity issues hurt my enjoyment. Because I want to be clear about something. I don't have a lot more to say about this one in particular. There aren't any like deeper themes to really examine here. This was just a fun action romp that told us conclusively that gems have a physical headspace that you can visit, which is something that the show does confirm later. So that in and of itself, lore-wise, is consistent. So I don't have a ton more to say here. So, I mean, there's the bonus comics. But like, what can I say about those? They're there and they're fun. I like the art style of pretty much all of them. There's one about Onion, kind of, not really about him. There's one featuring Onion that was good, but like, what can I say about them? They're short and they're interesting, but there's not a lot to them. They're just something. I mean, they're there. They're there to look forward to. So, end of the day, there isn't much more to say about this one. So I want to use this as the opportunity to say, I know I've come off really critical of these comics in the past, right? But that's only because this is still Steven Universe. These are, as far as I'm concerned, still Steven Universe reviews. As legitimate as any reviews of the show that I have ever put out. So, you know, all of my more recent ones and none of my older shitty ones, right? I'm taking these comic reviews just as seriously. And just like with the show, if there's something about these that I feel needs to be criticized, I'm going to criticize it. That doesn't mean I don't like them overall. I've really enjoyed reading these. It's like my issue with the covers. Again, the cover of this one has literally nothing to do with what's in the comic. I would prefer that it does. Call me old-fashioned, which doesn't even make sense as a joke, because old school comic covers had nothing to do with what was actually in the comic either. I don't know, call me modern then, I guess. And then there's the art, and I want to be clear. A lot of you guys have said in the comics of these reviews that you really like the art in these, and you think it works for Steven Universe. And in principle, I don't disagree with you. I just feel that there are some quirks to this art style that make these comics harder to read than they need to. So to get really specific with what I actually think the problem is with the art in these, the primary art, the art for the bonus comics is of course different. It mainly comes down to the brightness of the colors and the line weight. In Steven Universe proper, the character designs and the backgrounds were equally memorable, but the characters were distinct from the backgrounds. And you see that a lot in animation. The characters themselves will have deeper, thicker outlines, not by a lot, but by enough, than the objects in the backgrounds, or the objects in the background will have slightly softer or more muted colors to cause the characters to stand out from them a little more, and also because the backgrounds are drawn on different animation cell than the characters themselves, right? And so while it is, of course, important to integrate the characters well into the backgrounds to make it seem like they're actually interacting with them, and that's actually something that Steven Universe proper failed at sometimes, I think, occasionally. But it's also important that your characters stand out from the backgrounds. But in these comics, character models and background objects and even light effects and stuff, like energy attack effects and stuff, have roughly the same line weight to them and have roughly equally bright colors. So when a bunch of stuff is happening in one of these comics in front of a detailed, colorful background, it's sometimes really hard to tell what's happening. And that doesn't mean that the individual image itself isn't pretty to look at, because it tends to be more often than not. But it does make following the action in these difficult, even if it does make the non-action-y stuff a little more memorable overall. And so I feel if you're going to do a Steven Universe comic that has the slice-of-life stuff and the action stuff, if one looks so much significantly worse, is so much significantly harder to follow than the other in this art style, something should have given. Some compromise should have been made that maybe decreased the quality of the former a little bit in order to greatly enhance the quality of the latter. But even the action in this one, in that respect, is significantly better than what we've gotten in previous issues. Since it's mostly happening in Pearl's headspace, which is mostly a pearlish white void, the action-y stuff in front of the background popped and was much easier to follow in that regard too. Overall, these two issues together felt like an example of what these comics can be at their peak, in spite of the continuity hiccups. I can overlook the continuity hiccups if the story is good enough, and the story in these was really good. It was really fun. And man, I'll tell you this much, if I didn't already know about the interior gem headspace thing, this part of the lore would have blown my mind. Like, if I had read this comic when it first came out, that aspect of the lore would have blown my mind. I would have gotten such a kick out of seeing that. This comic does basically everything right, or at least as right as I would expect it to, being a nebulously canon side comic, right? I just feel like these comics overall could do what they're trying to do better. In fact, I kind of hope we get more two-parters like this rather than just standalones. Like, do what the show did, kind of. Give us a towny slice-of-life stuff as individual issues, and then give us the gem-related stuff as double issues like this, so you can actually draw out the action elements a little more. That would be such a better format than what we've been getting so far. And technically it would mean that the gem stuff is more prevalent, which is really what fans want, right? Still, I fully admit that art is subjective, and if the art, aside from the continuity mistakes, is my biggest complaint about these comics, and this comic in particular, there's a good chance a lot of you guys are going to like this one even more than I did. So more so than any past issues of this comic, I definitely recommend tracking down issues 5 and 6 and giving them a read. These are library parts 1 and 2, and they're really freaking good as far as I'm concerned. As I said before though, as far as I'm concerned, these are Steven Universe reviews, and this is what my channel was built on, with Steven Universe theories and reviews. So please share this video around. If you know somebody who used to watch my stuff and they haven't been showing up on these videos in particular, share this with them, please. I'd like to get these out to people. I want people who love Steven Universe to see more Steven Universe content, even if it's my pretty terrible stuff. So let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, you know, do that thing I just said, and also subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out my social medias and my Patreon and all the other ways that you can help out the channel. Links to all those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.